In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest, or most unsettling experience of your life? Story 1. Back when my grandfather passed away, his children and some of the grandchildren took turns staying over at Grandma's house. We'd spend the night and help her out around the house, while also having some time alone in the house we all love and spending some final moments with Grandpa's embalmed body in the living room where his big old desk used to be. The house was on a pretty big plot of land with a nice big barn, and while Grandma loved her gardening, Grandpa used to take care of the lawn. One day he felt a bit woozy while mowing the lawn, so he went inside and eventually ended up calling the doctor and going to the hospital. He passed away 3 weeks later, unwilling to fight the cancer that had formed in his gut over the past few years. As one of the older grandkids, I stayed over one night as well. Honestly speaking, I was a bit on edge with just having his body in the house, but nothing really eventful happened that night. I said goodnight to my grandfather and went upstairs to rest. The next morning, my grandmother was already preparing dinner for all the people who would be coming by to pay their respects. She, quite sternly, told me she wanted to do this particular thing alone. So I decided to start the day by mowing the stretch of lawn my grandfather never got to finish. I knew how big he and my grandmother had always been about having the garden in top shape whenever there were people over, and I didn't want to let him down. It wasn't a small patch of grass, but I figured the electric push mower should be more than enough. I hooked it up using a long orange extension cord and got to work. Now you have to know that my grandfather was a skilled but super safe handyman. He was an electrical engineer by trade, always working in the house or tinkering in the barn, doing the bigger gardening projects my grandmother couldn't do, making us toys, fixing our bikes, etc. We always got to help him out. But he always kept an eye on us with whatever we were doing, making sure we were using the tools in the correct way, weren't running around with screwdrivers in our pockets, and teaching us how to work with the electric mower and how to handle the long extension cord to not run over it with the mower. When I was mowing the lawn, I was thinking about all of that instead of actually minding the extension cord. I messed up. I ran over a coil of it, slightly damaging the cable down to the copper, but not cutting it in half completely. The safest way to proceed would be to unplug the cord, roll it back up, and get another, not damaged one. What it did puzzles me to this day. I was nearing completion anyway and decided to continue a bit longer, carefully avoiding the cord. After finishing up, I went to roll up the cord around my arm, as I always did, as my grandfather taught me. I was thinking about him and how hard this was on Grandma, and I stopped minding where I grabbed the cord. I grabbed straight at the exposed copper. I felt a short, sharp jolt in the palm of my hand and immediately realized what had happened. I tried to let go, but my hand and arm cramped up. At the time, naively, I thought I was going to die, and I thought about how stupid I had been and how this would impact my already grieving family. It must have only been a split second, but it felt like I had stood there for 10 minutes. Suddenly, the reflexes in my arm kicked in and I threw the cable to the floor. I took a moment to breathe and stood there, dazed out of my mind, listening to the wind in the trees and trying to figure out what had happened. I made my way into the barn to unplug the cord from the wall. It wasn't plugged in. I figured I must have yanked it out of the wall with my reflexes, but quickly realized the angle for me to be able to do that was all wrong. And besides, there was a ton of slack in the cable. I checked in and around the barn, but there was no one on the property. I could see my grandmother through the kitchen window, still working on preparing meals for the tens of people who would come around later. The dog was still in his own enclosure section of the garden on the other side of the house, ears pointed, tail in the air, eyes fixated on me and the barn behind me, nervously whimpering and pacing back and forth. I had never believed in something like a spirit world, an afterlife, souls, or energy staying behind in the physical world, but as silly as it sounds, on that day, I did. On that day, I was convinced my grandfather was watching my back to make sure I wasn't doing anything stupid. Story 2. When I was young in the mid-90s, aka the I know everything, I'm invincible and you can't stop me age, I got in a fight with an acquaintance while a whole bunch of us were hanging out at his house. Stupid fight. I can't remember what about it, but I decided to screw it. I was going home. I lived about 5 miles away, but I didn't have a car, and since it was 2 a.m., there were no buses. I was going to walk home, in the middle of the night, through a not as safe as it seems neighborhood, as a tiny young girl. So I did. I think in hindsight, my friends either didn't believe I was going to do it or were too startled by the sudden argument to realize what I was doing. I left the house and started hoofing it. About a mile out, the suburban housing neighborhood melted into a main street with highway access. I started to notice a grayish minivan following me. It would follow me, pass me, turn a corner, and about 3 blocks later it would do the same thing. I mean, it was really obvious what it was doing. I crossed over to the other side of the street, so I was walking the opposite of the traffic flow, and thus no car could come up behind me. It kept doing it on the other side of the street. About a mile later, there was a 24-hour Fred Meyer. The lights were bright, but the parking lot was empty. I immediately crossed the parking lot and went inside. Just before I got to the doors, the minivan that had been following me pulled up into one of the parking spots. A guy called out from the driver's side and said, "I don't want you to walk over here. Just stay there and listen. I just wanted to let you know what I was doing. I saw you walking a while back, but I also saw a dark car that was following you. A couple of times you went to turn around or stop, so it started following you down a parallel side street. When I saw it, I started to follow you both just to make sure you were safe. Go inside the store and call someone to come pick you up, please. I haven't seen the car since you headed across the lot." He waited until I was inside the store and then pulled away. I didn't have anyone to call, so I just let the night cashier know what was going on and hung out with her for about an hour and a half. Then I finished the walk home. I've never forgotten the incident or that man, whoever he was. During the walk, I never saw the dark car he mentioned, but I've always been convinced he saved my life that night. Story 3. We rented a house that never felt like home. You always felt creeped out walking in there, like you were being watched. My boyfriend and our roommates both worked nights, so I would be there by myself a lot. One night I was doing my usual stuff and watching some TV before bed. I had this overwhelming feeling all night that I should avoid the hallway and not look directly down it. It was creepy. The feeling of being watched and terrified lasted about 2 hours before I decided to suck it up and make my way to my room. I left the hallway lights on and went to bed. Just as I turned off the side table light, I heard a drawer being pulled out and hitting the stopper. I turned on the light and nothing was out of place. This went on about 6 times before I decided I was sleeping with the light on. I curled up under the covers and waited for my boyfriend to get home. He comes rolling in about 3 a.m. He's laughing at me for being so scared, gets into bed and turns the light off. And that's when all hell broke loose. All the doors down the hallway slammed shut one by one, and then our closet door started rattling. The sound coming from inside could only be described as total destruction. It sounded like the shelves, the pole, and everything in there was being tossed around. The boyfriend joined me under the covers and we were both terrified. After it stopped, it took 5 to 10 minutes to convince him to go check around the house. Nothing was out of place, and our roommate had driven 3 hours back home that night to be with his family, so we knew it wasn't him. We slept with the light on the rest of the night and moved out soon after. I still can't drive by that house without being creeped out. Man, I wouldn't have been able to sleep through all those noises. If you think what this couple experienced was creepy, you'd get major goosebumps with what the little kid experienced in Story 6. Story 4. This is the story of how a creepy encounter with a scary man at a harbor cafe saved me from something even more terrifying. It was in the autumn of 1994 and I was young. At the time, my dad had been working for almost 6 months abroad and was planning a surprise visit. My dad and I have always been close. I'm an only child and my mother passed away from cancer when I was still a baby, so it was just my dad and I, really. A tiny family, but he made up for it by being the most awesome parent ever. Now that I wasn't a little kid anymore, I appreciated that more and more. I booked the ticket and was ready to go. It was going to be great fun to surprise him with a visit. I had to take the ferry though. I had just gotten my driver's license and felt really unhappy about having to drive my little car on board the ferry, so I decided to not bring a car at all and just rent one once I got there. Having time to spend, I decided to have coffee at a nearby cafe since I was early. They hadn't started letting people onto the ferry just yet. At the cafe, there were lots of truck drivers and I soon realized I was the only woman there. One man, a 40-ish bloke with ice blue eyes and tattoos all over, was eyeing me from across the room. Something about him made my skin crawl. I got up to leave, feeling suddenly very uncomfortable, and to my utter horror, he followed. What do I do now? I asked myself. This was before everyone owned a cell phone, I might add. I decided to try and look busy and maybe he would leave me alone, so I pulled out my ticket and tried to look like I was reading it carefully when he suddenly snatched it from my hand and said, "I'm on the same boat. I'll have hours of your company then." How lovely. In a voice that was an absurd combination of jovial flattery and hidden hostility. I felt very strongly that if I got on the boat with this man, who now knew my booking details, I'd be in grave danger. I can't explain why the feeling was so overwhelming, but it was, and I decided there and then not to get in the boat. The ticket had been cheap anyway, I could get in the next one instead. I hid in the ladies' room until I knew the ferry had left and then I went to rebook my ticket. The story could have ended there, a creepy encounter with a stalkerish man, but it doesn't. I was right in the assumption that getting on that ferry would have been unbelievably dangerous. Haven't you figured it out yet? The day was September 28, 1994. The name of the ship was MS Estonia, and that cold night she sank at the Baltic Sea, taking 852 people with her, resulting in the worst ferry catastrophe to strike Sweden to this day. I still recall that day with horror and wonder what would have happened if this creepy man had not taken an interest in me. If I had not listened to my instinct and gone on board instead of waiting for the next boat, would I have been among the survivors? Or would my dad have seen my name in the list of lives lost in the Baltic Sea? Story 5. When I was young, my family rented a house close to the beach for a week. The drive wasn't very long, but as a kid, by the time we got there, I really had to feed the porcelain stallion a brown bone. We pulled into the driveway and were met by a middle-aged woman who owned the house, showed us the place and told us about the town, what to do, etc. My first instinct is to find the bathroom. So I ask, and she tells me it's the second door on the right after the kitchen. I went inside and opened the bathroom door to find an older guy just standing there looking at me. I kind of ducked my head down, said sorry, and went back outside. They noticed I was back pretty fast, and I told them there was something in the bathroom already. That's when it got weird. The lady looked at me confusedly and said there was no one else in the house. I explained that I definitely saw someone in that bathroom. After searching the house, we found no evidence of anyone else being there. After a while, the lady told us her dad owned the house, lived there, and recently passed away. She inherited the house and wasn't sure what to do with it, so she started renting it out. Pretty sure I saw that dude. Story 6. I was sitting in our office room at home alone when I was young. I was typing a paper for one of my college classes. The office room used to be my sister's room before she moved out, so a lot of her decorations are still there. She had a photo of a mountain range, an oval-shaped mirror, and 3 different hangings that read faith, hope, and love. This makes 5 total things hanging on the wall in the room. Suddenly I got random chills, which happens all the time. It was pretty cold, but this time, as soon as I got the chills, everything in the room hanging on the walls fell off simultaneously. This really freaked me out, but it got a tiny bit worse. I got up and walked out of the room, only to notice everything hanging on a wall in my house had fallen. All the pictures in the living room and other rooms, all the trophies in my room from Little League sports, and even a stand that held candles. I wasn't sure what to do. I picked up all the stuff and hung it back up, which actually took me around 15 to 20 minutes. Then I drove to campus to finish my paper. I never told my parents. It's also worth mentioning that this happened around noon on a sunny day 3 winters ago. Story 7. This one is not too scary, but my aunt and uncle moved into a 19th century home in a small town in Maine a few years ago. Think something from Stephen King. Their neighbors warned them about previous paranormal incidents. Since they moved in, many more incidents have taken place. These incidents include, but are not limited to, there was an in-your-face chocolate smell in the kitchen when no one had been cooking. Random items appear in places they shouldn't be. My aunt was a school administrator, now retired, and she has a filing cabinet full of old documents in the basement. One night, while I was visiting, a binder from that filing cabinet was underneath my bed when I woke up. The filing cabinet was in the very back of their storage space and would have required someone to scramble over camping equipment, old furniture, etc., to get to it. Weird. Levitating objects. I was super skeptical of this one. My aunt was home alone, running on a treadmill in her basement. Unexplained banging noises came from the ground floor. She yells, "For heaven's sake, shut up already!" And the banging subsides. The most memorable incident for me was when my uncle noticed that his medication went missing. My aunt yelled to the ghost that his medication was important and was the one thing that was not to be played with. They later found a spill bottle standing upright underneath the bed. Standing upright. They couldn't have rolled underneath. It never happened again. The ghost has not really done anything harmful, and from what I've heard, it can even be described as playful. We have affectionately dubbed the ghost Gracie the Ghost. Story 8. I was a vehicle mechanic in the Army Reserves when I was younger. On one overnight drill, we drove a convoy of trucks from Baltimore to Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia on the old state highways. Things started out pretty normally, but as we were driving, the convoy gradually started slowing down, and after a while, the whole line of trucks slowed to a crawl. We pulled off the road, and the guy in the lead truck told us his 5-ton truck wouldn't accelerate at all. We switched trucks, and sure enough, it won't go above 5 miles per hour. I dropped the truck out of the convoy, and my motor sergeant stayed with me in a pickup truck. About a half hour later, we happened to cross an old gas station and decided that we were not going anywhere fast, so we will park the truck there. I was to remain with the truck until he could come back later and transfer everything to another one. So off drives my motor sergeant, and I'm out in the middle of southern Maryland with nobody around. It starts getting dark, and I see the lights are on and the restaurant is open at the gas station. I'm hungry as hell, so in I go. I sit down in a booth by the window where I can keep an eye on the truck, and a lady comes and asks me what I want to eat. I asked if I could see a menu, and she said she didn't have one, but they had fried chicken and mashed potatoes, and that sounded pretty good to me, so I ordered it. I was starving, and it was the best damn fried chicken I've ever eaten. I finished, got the bill, left my money on the table, and walked back out to the truck. Stayed awake for a while, but eventually, I lay down across the seat and slept for a few hours. Now about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, another truck shows up with a bunch of guys, and we start transferring gear to the other 5-ton. One of the guys says, "You must be starving." And I say, "No, I ate at the restaurant." Well, this guy gives me the strangest look and says, "You didn't eat at that restaurant. Look at it." Well, it's the middle of the night and I can't see the building that well, and I just told him he was crazy and we left. I slept a couple more hours and then we had to go back in the morning to deal with this broken down truck, and that's when I had a what the hell moment. All the windows to this station are boarded up and the place looks like it had been abandoned for 20 years. At this point, I'm seriously weirded out, so I go over and peek through the glass in the door, which is uncovered. The money was still sitting on the table. I couldn't get away from that place fast enough. I would have noped out of there as fast as I could too. If you like creepy tales like this, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Story 9. My friend passed away in a car accident and they towed the car pretty early in the day. We were teens, so we thought we could go collect all her things that were ejected from the car when she hit the tree. After about a half hour, I was overwhelmed and just sat down and started crying. I had my 2 friends with me cleaning stuff up and they just let me get it out for a bit. Someone started rubbing my shoulders in the deepest massage I've ever had, and it was really helping me get control of myself and relaxing me. I let them rub for a few minutes and then I put my hand on theirs to let them know I was appreciative. There was no hand, just my shoulder. I turned around to say thank you to whoever it was and there was nobody. I looked up at the car and my 2 friends were standing there talking about something. Something had been touching me. I ran to the car and asked my friends if it was them. They looked at me like I was crazy. I made everyone get in the car super fast and we left. I think a spirit was comforting me in my loss. I'm grateful and freaked out for it. I can still remember how it felt and it's been 22 years. Story 10. One time when I was in middle school, I fell asleep on the couch in our living room. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up and saw a man walk through the wall adjoining our living room to my brother's room. The man noticed me and turned to face me. He had half his face missing, as if he had been dragged along the highway. He put his finger to his lips as if to tell me not to tell anyone, and then turned forward and walked through our glass door into our yard. I was obviously freaked out, so I ran into my brother's room to find an empty bed. I ran screaming and crying to my parents, and they freaked out and started calling all my brother's friends' houses, trying to find him. When they finally got in touch with him, they found out he had been at a college party drinking about an hour away. My dad went to pick up my brother and his best friend, not wanting them to drive home hammered. The next day, we found out that the kid who was originally going to drive my brother home was ejected from his car during a drunk driving accident. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What is the scariest paranormal story that is 100% true? Story 4 will send shivers down your spine. See you on that video.